Colleagues, good evening. Welcome everybody. By the end of day 2 of this amazing days, so full of news, so full of new developments. So we shall be talking about new developments, about the future, and we'll be even more amazed. I'm Gaidar Alexander. I'm the Executive Director of the Effective Healthcare Platform. And here at RANEPA, we launched that platform several years, up to 7 years ago, and we are in the process of ongoing research and development aiming at better healthcare in the Russian Federation. We have an impressive panel of speakers here. And we are faced with an ambitious task. I will be introducing speakers to you as I give them the floor. And I would also like to note at this point that we have a unique opportunity. Every speaker told me they do not have any written papers to read out. This is a rare occasion that we shall open up the floor for free discussion. We also have experts sitting in the front row. They will be listening to you carefully, and I will certainly insist that they give me their comments and proposals or the feedback on what they've just heard. The healthcare of the future and the balanced budget. And Veronika Skorsova made an in-depth paper and offering us her vision of what healthcare will look like in the future. And she talked about new technology and scientific breakthroughs that will change the landscape of healthcare. And the image and the combination of various factors, non-medical factors, for instance, would define the landscape. We further believed that it would be a good idea to talk about how a healthcare budget should be structured and should be organized. Here's another thing I'd like to hear from you. Please, let's take a look into the future. A glimpse of the future is a good thing to exercise. So we'll have a better life, better quality, happier life. So what can we do to make this future happen? And now, before I ask my first question, I'd like to note that statistics today say that we are approaching a stage when the system needs to be overhauled. Well, some patients, critical patients, or difficult condition patients may soak up to 50% of the healthcare budget. And I believe that we need to change this landscape. And this is something I'm going to ask you to comment on. New technology that has become part of our lives. Give us some room for optimism, hope that this system may be changed for the better. Well, we have heads of 2 federation members here. We'd like to hear from them as to how they define their happiness, or any recipe for happiness, what they think about that. Well, there is a lot of inequality between different federation members. We span across 11 time zones. And this brings about many challenges that need to be addressed through very different approaches. And different solutions are available, or should be. Now, I'm about to ask my question. Natalia Forova, Deputy Minister of Healthcare. So, Natalia Alexandrovna, so we now faced with a certain forklift in the budget. We need to introduce a concept where per capita health budget should be smaller, although the overall budget should grow. So what is your vision of this? How can this budget be balanced so that we can approach the target figures mentioned by the President. We have repeatedly said that healthcare should be aiming at a three-tier system. So we were busy restructuring the healthcare system starting from 2011. And we realized that a lot of investment was required. While talking about the period 2010 to 2020, our healthcare expenditures increased to 0.5 to 2.4 trillion rubles this year, 2020. How do we spend this money? To improve the efficiency of the system, we need to structure it properly, and fixed assets need to be laid out appropriately. Well, the fixed assets in the healthcare system are depreciated by 52.7%. So that we bring it back to the norm, we need to invest huge resources. And this is what we have been doing in recent years when we started upgrading that system. We started upgrading it back in 2011, 2012. We spent enormous resources and we could only achieve a partial solution. I believe that the situation was somehow perpetuated. A little has changed dramatically since 2012. The depreciation ratio is about the same. All federally funded projects are aiming at a comprehensive solution of healthcare issues. Mainly, we're talking about infrastructure investment. We are talking about the procurement of mobile medical stations. We want to bring medical facilities closer to patients. Now, pursuing presidential decree, we want to take stock of our fixed assets so that at the primary tier we have a resolution of outstanding issues. Today, while our regions are near the completion of this stock-taking, and before July the 1st of this year, we are to approve the modernization program for the primary tier, and we have 500 billion rubles to achieve that. Whether this is a large sum of money or not is yet to be seen. Let's see what region asks for. We expect actual expenditures to be larger than that. And we gave the priority to an efficient combination and proper location of medical institutions and medical facilities. And this is why we set up an information and IT system back in 2016. Together with the governors and healthcare regional authorities, we want to review the situation and identify our drawbacks and shortcomings. And our major resources need to be invested in the primary tier. And this should require an across-the-board effort. And we also trying to implement that through 8 priority projects. However, I want to say that from the outset, we need to maintain a balance in healthcare modernization through continual investment. 1.4 trillion rubles are to be invested as part of the Healthcare National Project, plus 500 billion rubles as part of the actual modernization program. All this is an indication of the fact that the more we invest, the more money we need to pay for medical services. Why so? Because we are investing in expensive medical equipment, surgical equipment, new technologies. To achieve that, we need to maintain that equipment properly, do some ongoing repairs and maintenance. These are costly items. Well, we believe that the compulsory medical insurance system can cover all ongoing expenses like the payroll, and we actually want to increase the average pay of medical personnel to 200% of the average for a given region. And eventually, we came up with a situation when 70% of the entire healthcare budget is soaked up by the payroll, and we have very little funds to finance other expenses, including utility bills, rent, procurement of medicines and materials, etc. So that this three-tier system comes into place and be efficient, we need to implement the oncology and cardiovascular projects. All these projects are aiming, amongst other things, at the procurement of modern and advanced equipment to improve the quality of medical help. There's also another outstanding issue, which is the shortage of skilled labor. And this is part of the puzzle. And as we are trying to improve the quality of healthcare, we need to pay a lot of attention to improving the quality of medical personnel. I already mentioned that starting from the year 2010 to 2020, the growth of these expenses increased fourfold. And by the year 2020, the healthcare system soaks up 4.2 trillion rubles. We're talking about 2.7 times more than back in 2010. However, if we take a look at what is the percentage of the GDP that budget is, then it comes to a very modest 3%, which is not a lot. Thank you. My next question goes to Maxim Reshetnikov, governor of the First Krai. Well, several issues have already been raised. Well, with the shortage of medical personnel, especially the primary care, doctors, paramedics, and so there's a shortage of approximately 20,000 people. So, coming back to our glimpse of the future, are there any other unorthodox way of dealing with that? Because it would otherwise take a lot of time. You have to recruit, train, retrain, and it will take quite a number of years. Are there any other options for us? Self-employment? Anything else? Do you believe that we could make use of other tools? Say the Kaluga region is one example, and we wanted to find out from them. I believe that your region, as far as I know, is on the list of those who would be able to offer self-employment. So, do you think you will be able to fill in this gap by alternative efforts? If you mean that we could employ other people from amongst self-employed? Well, I don't know. This is something standing apart from the mainstream solution, because self-employment is something else. I believe that is reaching too far into the future for our state-run guarantees and state system. Although when it comes to some ancillary services like getting a second opinion or interpreting some scans, well, I believe that we also need to look at the breakdown of the insurance funds and the actual civil relations and the tax regime applicable to self-employed versus staff personnel. I believe that sooner or later insurance funds will be losing revenues, and we need to keep track of that, to look after that. We want to avoid losing the revenue base. I would rather offer another approach, although this is a key issue, of course, it is. We, say, took the city of Perm as an example. We took our outpatient clinics and others and tried to look into the workload in terms of regulatory norms and doctors' instructions and manuals. It turned out that we probably need to increase our personnel by 50% or so to comply with the existing norms and regulations. We physically lack qualified and skilled personnel. And what can be done about that? We ask ourselves. We believe that our system has some room for improving internal efficiency, meaning that people need to work more efficiently than before. In plain terms, we need to keep track of patient visits and doctor visits, and we need to increase that. We actually assigned all paperwork to paramedics, which is already a good thing. And we have more paramedics than doctors or nurses, and we can actually increase their workload somewhat. But then here comes another question: why do we need an awful lot of paperwork? Say, if there are some chronically ill children patients, why do they need a lot of paperwork every time they visit a doctor? A whole pile of paperwork. And I believe that when a new school year begins, every parent needs to bring their child to a doctor and get a certificate, a medical certificate or an expert, so that no one's ill in their block of flats or somewhere. Moscow addressed that from another perspective. They actually went from another angle, and they compiled a list of blocks of flats or houses with ill patients, registered ill patients, and they only asked them to visit a doctor before they sent their kid to school. And this alone helped us increase efficiency and labor efficiency by 16% without changing the headcount of the doctors and paramedics. We can actually improve that by another 8 to 10%, no sweat. We also need to take a look at the actual payroll, meaning that the chief doctor at an outpatient clinic or a hospital will get paid based on the number of doctors or paramedics they serve, by each surgeon or each ear doctor or each infectious disease doctor. And once you look at this chart, you will see that there are so many vacancies which are not filled in, and still they received the money on the payroll. You then look at them closely and see that on the staff of a given hospital there are 20 drivers and 15 accountants and bookkeepers. Well, this is ludicrous. Well, many young people, having received their diplomas, will not work as doctors, not a single day. To change that situation, we need to pay them more. And on the one hand, if we keep on with the centralization of accounting functions, if we make medical institutions larger than they are now, this will help us save. That will be an economy of scale, save on resources, and hire more medical personnel. Same goes about medical labs. Well, medical labs are paid separately from the rest of the medical expenses. And thanks to the colleagues, we have made a huge stride forward because, well, a lot of budget appropriations were made for medical laboratories. Because otherwise, doctors think that they're actually paying for lab analysis, lab tests from their own salary. Well, this system, the funding system, has been changed. And, well, not all regions can boast medical laboratories, and it turned out that one hospital did not trust a lab located elsewhere, and vice versa. Well, these are issues which are pertaining to micromanagement. This is something we need to get rid of. I further believe, and I agree with Natalia Alexandrovna here, who said that we need to increase healthcare budgets. And the modernization program is a sine qua non. It is totally indispensable, and Andrei will probably support me. Half of the hospitals out there in the regions are old barracks, they're old decrepit houses. We need to upgrade them, and this will require a consistent and long-term effort, because there are so few designers, like a couple of companies that can properly design hospital buildings and medical institutions. Because we need more than that. We need to upgrade both equipment. People expect much more from us. They expect heavy and ramified infrastructure from us, and we're ready. We can actually take some funding from other areas to increase the funding of healthcare. But that will take monumental effort.
So we ought to do a lot in order to first increase the effectiveness of the system, and secondly, we need to together with increasing the investment into the healthcare, we need to improve the outpatient service. But we are already started implementing this strategy. We have already taken this correct direction of work, but we shouldn't increase our expectations to a level too high. We will not solve all the problems overnight. We have, say, 50 problems, and every one of them will not be an easy one to solve. Thanks. Just a small comment from what I've just heard. Thank you for all the great examples and all the great cases that you've just cited. You've just said that thanks to digital technologies, we can save on physically going to outpatient clinics, and we can use this resource in order to obtain macro results. We have the governor of the Orlov region here with us, and I have the following question to you. We have just finished another discussion on healthcare, on medicines provision, and in the introduction I've already said that we do have a huge country, and of course not all the regions are equal. They are all different, but at the same time the tasks are uniform for all of them. So that is the first bullet point, the first statement on my part, and secondly, the starting point is different for all of them. In some regions, your successor, or maybe the successors of, the predecessors of other governors, they renovated something, but not everywhere the situation is at the same level. So how can we level that inequality, that disbalance, and how can we calculate the budget funds needed for that? Because we know, for example, that not always the countries with biggest budgets for healthcare provide the highest quality of healthcare services. I'll probably start with the last statement of yours, or at least I will cite an example on that matter. The decision to reform the primary care has been perceived very positively. Indeed, the population, the citizens were expecting that, and it is one of the key priorities for us indeed. And of course, we are glad that today we've set ourselves tasks to increase the amount of financing in terms of the planned programs, but at the same time we understand that it is not enough, and our regions are different. There is a huge discrepancy between even neighboring regions, even though sometimes they seem to have similar budgets, but nevertheless they had different programs on modernization of their equipment and their facilities. At the same time, as I've already said, the tasks are the same, and we have to provide proper and equal medical care for all the citizens of our country, independently on their location. Several other things that are important for understanding the situation. From November of the last 2 months, we were tasked with providing a program for reforming the primary care, and the primary care has to cover the whole territory of our country. And Maxim has rightly said, over 2 months we have prepared a program that was to be developed during several years. We've submitted it. For Orlov, we've planned more than 7 billion rubles, and I know that all the regions are going to claim the highest amount possible in order to finance these reforms. First of all, we need to renovate our facilities, starting from the rural care and obstetric stations up to city hospitals. We have a lot of facilities to renovate. Secondly, we need to renovate the equipment, medical equipment, and of course it requires huge amounts of investments. I'm listing all that because, you know, it's important to consider that we have increased over the last several years the budget of Orlov region by 5 billion rubles, but even that is not enough. Another problem is skilled labor resources. We are all in different situations. So we are 300 kilometers from Moscow, and if we look at the target parameters, the salary of 50,000 rubles will not prevent a good, skilled medical professional from relocating to Moscow and earning more. There is another problem. Putting a target in terms of skilled labor resources, we should understand that we can only meet that target in 5 to 7 year time. The next question is housing, and so on. There are many of them. So today, in order to bring all the regions to common denominator, I don't think that we have a uniform solution, and of course not everything can be solved with money. For regions, one of the ways may be changing the program of social and economic development and tailoring it to the needs of the region. But we see that even in Moscow it is not always possible because, you know, the system of healthcare is not elastic enough to take in everyone, to cover everything. And we are thinking, like, if we cannot provide a uniform level of salaries across the country, maybe we can compensate that by providing the necessary technical facilities and equipment. And maybe we can increase the status of this profession in regions. That may be part of the solution. Thank you. Another question goes to Galina Izotova from the Accounts Chamber. According to our legislation, the Accounts Chamber is to control the implementation of the budget. So you assess the effectiveness of public expenditures, all the finances allocated for public needs. So you audit the results and the achievement in terms of implementing strategic development goals. A question. The goals have to be achievable, otherwise there is no sense in setting those goals. Having listened to all the previous speakers, could you please say whether the targets and goals are achievable, and do we have the reserves to compensate for the distance that we are to cover? Well, of course, the Accounts Chamber monitors national projects very responsibly today. We monitor the implementation of federal projects and federal programs, national projects. In the beginning of this year, we've started building groups that will be tasked with monitoring our national goals. So we are monitoring the results. are goals achievable or not? Considering the analysis that we have performed, there is a risk of the goals being unachievable. When you look at parameters and try to find connection and interdependency between them, well, you know, expenditures, they have to be tied to targets and to specific programs. It is quite simple and obvious. We have target parameters, and of course, we assessing those parameters, we sometimes see that as a result of 2018 and 2019, some parameters of both national programs and some projects, they will not be achieved. Of course, we are in continuous dialogue and contact with the ministry, with the fund. We are discussing that on a continuous basis. And right now, I think that we have this great time when we need, using the experience that we have accumulated over this year and considering the tasks that were voiced by the President yesterday. Of course, today we need to adjust the parameters that were defined for national projects. What are the risks here? Colleagues and distinguished governors said that we need to increase our expenditures. It is so. We come to the same conclusion. It is impossible today, from our point of view, to implement all the programs to attain all the goals with our volumes of financing and investments. If we look at the global trends, everything says that we need to increase our expenditures. The normal level of the GDP amount that should be allocated for that is 10% of the GDP. Globally, this parameter is about 8.8%. By 2024, from various sources, we will be able to pull approximately the amount equal to 7% of our GDP. Statistics that we are looking at, and we are studying it thoroughly, this experience says that the overall trend in OECD countries is approximately 9%. So we should set ourselves a task to increase financing of this industry in order to solve all the problems we have there. Speaking about state guarantees program, we have a federal state guarantee program and a regional one, but look at how they are implemented across the country, across regions. The discrepancy in terms of provision of medicines, it is huge. In Orlov region, I cannot cite you figures for all the regions. I do not have the statistics on me, but believe me, these figures are very different. At this stage, when we need to reset our system, when we need to do a lot in order to adjust these parameters and goals according to the tasks set by the President, we need to look at these priorities, and then internally maybe we should revise these projects. Maybe we could create a project office that would do that. If you look at various models that are offered at various levels, everywhere we mention extra budgetary sources. Do we have mechanisms to attract those resources? No, we don't have a model for managing these sources of financing. Then let us say openly to our colleagues, to the society, that the programs that we have in our country, including regional programs, they still are to be balanced. They have to be revised seriously, because we are aiming for high goals, right? But how can we attain them? How can we implement those programs? last but not least, I know that today there was a very interesting panel on medicines. We are tackling this matter and we are working seriously there. We have planned for a number of expert events in that domain for this year. And we know that we think that maybe we should consider providing management and administration of that matter on the federal level, because again there is a huge discrepancy between situations in various regions there again. More than 50% of the financing that is invested into healthcare comes from the Fund of Compulsory Medical Insurance. We should rethink that distribution of responsibility there again. The accounts chamber, right now we are revising our policy. You've said that we are controllers, but we are not. We spend a major part of our time for financial audit, and we are partners of the government. We want to use our opportunity, our high expert position, and we are in fact engaging experts of very high level. We want to help to build a system of management that will be able to solve the problem. We cannot we cannot keep finding solutions on the spot. We need to come up with a comprehensive model. So I think that's about it. Thank you. Can I ask a question? Could you please park it till the end of our session? Okay, thank you. Natalia Nikolaevna Stadchenko, President of the Compulsory Medical Insurance Fund. I've mentioned that in the beginning of our discussion. Life expectancy in our country goes up. People live longer, we spend more money for their treatment, and that actually leads us into a trap. We pay for the work done, and for medical institutions, it's in a way profitable to have more patients, to have more clients, because they charge per visit. I think that it will be mentioned again throughout our discussion. There is this famous phrase, value-based healthcare. It means healthcare that is result-oriented, not process-oriented. Your position in this part, we're talking about the future today, right? What is the position of your fund? What do you plan in order to speed up the transition to that format? What tools do we have for that? Do you think that it is a right model for the healthcare of the future? Thank you. Picking up on what has been said by my colleagues, I agree to all the statements about those serious investments that are needed. And of course, we should focus on the outpatient care, on preventive care, early diagnostics, and improving the overall quality of life of our people. I will briefly comment on what has been said by heads of regions. We do work a lot on that matter, and our budget for 2020 actually provides for increased financing of the primary care with a focus on expensive equipment, and we are going to increase financing and increase the amount of support. The overall growth will be about 10%. Budget in the next period, we are going to consider what expensive equipment has been supplied to the primary care, and we are going to provide financing for the research work. Another important aspect. 2019 and 2020 are announced to be the years of outpatient examination provided to the population, and we focus on oncology screening first of all. That is why financing of preventive care and diagnostics has been increased by 24%. Apart from that, outpatient care for people of 65 years old and over has been increased by 60%. We have revised the coefficients for financing rural areas, small towns and remote locations, considering that we have to increase that coefficient of differentiation in order to provide adequate financing. Another important aspect is the effective use of the allocated funds that are already quite significant considering the planned growth. As you have rightly said, our goal is not improving financing for the sake of financing, but of course the focus is on quality. That is why we started implementing the institution of insurance representatives. Today, the insurance representatives, amount to 14,000, and they focus on very specific functions. We have revised the rules for compulsory medical education to do that, and these rules provide step-by-step rules on how people should perform that outpatient medical examination, how the control should be imposed, and how the medical aid provision should be controlled.
And changes have been made to Executive Order 36 of the Federal Fund for Compulsory Medical Insurance on examination services. And those changes are aiming at topical examinations of cancer patients so that quality examination of the quality of medical aid be carried out at a higher level, so that every case be reviewed meticulously. Well, there are 3 medical centers, there are 3 of them oncological centers, and all constituent members of the Russian Federation are distributed amongst these 3 centers, and the results of the reviews or repeated reviews will be made known to all those centers. In their turn, they will do the training, retraining, and oversee oncologists in providing medical aid. In other words, we have made it a fully intertwined system of medical aid. It's not supervision for the sake of supervision. We are doing that so that we do our homework, review mistakes made, and together with the federal and regional oncologists, we could actually sort that out and eliminate any drawbacks. Thank you. Thank you. Let's move onwards then. Let's now build a bridge towards our experts, because I want them to get involved in this discussion. Traditionally, and we know that the private sector is always most flexible and most responsive. So what's your position? The medical insurance, so how much private sector is involved? Is this a spare reserve that can be engaged effectively in changing the healthcare landscape? Over 30% of medical institutions participating in the program of state guarantees are privately owned. They are working in regions, and they are also involved in the territorial or regional programs of medical insurance. Originally, back in 2011-2012, we were mainly talking about dental services. Now, medical aid offered by private institutions are a broad range, dialysis, the extracorporeal fertility services, and there are so many interesting interesting programs they have come up with, and general practitioners maybe may come from privately owned clinics or rehab services are also there. I would also like to note that the Health Ministry is building a three-tier medical aid system, and all private medical institutions in a given region should be made part of that three-tier system. In other words, we need to promote those private medical institutions which are in demand. If rehab services are insipid in a given region, let us give the first priority to private rehab clinics. Oh, yes, there is one other thing. For instance, from the year 2020, private medical institutions will be allowed to offer advanced medical services not covered by basic medical insurance, meaning we are deploying that system, but we are a state-run and state-controlled system, and they need to be part of the existing system. Well, why don't we ask heads of regions? So how prominent, how visible they are. So when they say that we need to get the private sector involved and we need to offer them some funding, we will then have to come to the private sector and say, you must do this and that. And they would normally respond, so we don't owe you nothing. And I fully agree that there should be a very fine-tuned balance between the public and private medical institutions. Because otherwise, what do we do with the existing doctors? If private companies may act more actively than state-controlled. And so we normally would talk to them, would make a deal with them. So here's a vacant niche, and you will fill it in, and we shall help you with that, okay? And I believe it is a matter of making a deal. And I'd like to follow up on what Andrei has just said. We are somewhat cautious about the involvement of private clinics and getting them involved in the system of public guarantees. Although our rates is improving year on year, well, some of the rates are lucrative, others are less lucrative, and we believe that we are trying to make our rates more attractive to private clinics. However, if we discard an order and hand it over to private clinics, then we will deprive our state-run and state-owned clinics of something else, and they will get an imbalance in terms of payroll and fees payable to private versus public clinics. I'd also like to support Andrei in saying that if new niches on the market emerge, then why don't we give them over to private clinics? Because this is something they can do quickly. This is something they can they're in a better position to fill in. They will get quickly licensed to offer these services. The same goes about radiologies and canyons. However, we need to maintain a very delicate balance. Well, like radiology, 3 counties are ours, 2 we give over to private clinics. So we keep track of that delicate balance. And we'll probably need to think more about how long-term these services need to be. We would probably need to depart from 12 months to 36 months. It's like we can sign like 5-year contracts, 10-year contracts. This is not a task one can resolve overnight, but we need to give it a careful thought. Thank you, Natalia. Well, I believe that my colleagues have just voiced their opinions, which are fully in line with the policy pursued by the Health Ministry. Well, when it came to oncology, we thought carefully about who to get involved, who to invite to join in. And we first originally decided to build new centers. Then we decided that perhaps investors should come in and build new facilities and offer new services, very expensive services, using their own funding. Because, well, this insurance system is open-ended. And, well, there are numerous options and opportunities to join in, whether you are a public company or a private company. Well, services offered by private companies still should be quality services, and this is important. So if we receive a private clinic who just offer one kind of medical service. There are so many of them mushrooming around in the Crimea lately. So we decided that we probably need to offer them some vacant niches to fill in. And, well, those pet centers, for instance, but the healthcare system will not carry that burden, the financial burden of keeping them and funding them. Let private clinics come in and do the job. Starting from this year, 2020, we have decided that we shall earmark 5 billion rubles for the new pet services, and 1.5 billion are earmarked for private clinics located in St. Petersburg. Hopefully, St. Petersburg, not hopefully, I'm sure that St. Petersburg will have a say too. Now, let me pass the floor on to the experts. The first one is Sura, who is the managing director of IMEA in Janssen. Well, let's look into the future and comment on that. What are your recipes? What do you think about the role of the corporate sector, of private businesses in healthcare? How can we fine-tune the healthcare budget? Thank you. You have the floor.
Very pleased to be here representing Johnson & Johnson and Janssen, the pharmaceutical branch, in this very important debate. Let me maybe start by stating that we working in an innovative pharmaceutical company. We are Johnson & Johnson convinced that this new decade is going to bring spectacular progress in healthcare, and on that I think that it's a fantastic opportunity for countries across the world to really embrace this opportunity. And indeed, innovation is not going to just come from medicinal innovation, but in other areas. But clearly, biomedicines are going to play a very important role. And I think that Russia is particularly well placed, and we are extremely pleased to see the increasing investments in healthcare and the disproportionate effort, for example, that is being made in oncohematology. Whilst at the same time, resources are limited, and when it comes to investment in healthcare, there is never enough, isn't it? And this is clearly something that you see also in the regions, and choices need to be made. And in that sense, I want to stress the fact that it has been broadly proven that investing in innovation when it comes to pharmaceutical products has been consistently paying back to healthcare systems in the last decades. And there is very strong data that support, for example, that up to 70% of the gains in the life expectancy are directly related with innovative pharmaceuticals being launched. So I think that with those data, I think that the question should not be if there is going to be no access to innovation, but how the right frameworks are going to be put together for that access to be a reality. And it's not just about the benefits, direct benefits in healthcare, but it's also about the societal benefits and the economic benefits. And on that, we are very much advocating for creating also headroom for innovation in other spaces of healthcare, also including when it comes to the pharmaceutical expenditure and optimization on generics and on other areas, to make sure that the right efficiencies and the right pricing mechanisms are established in the more commoditized part of the business, to free those resources and and invest in innovation. And maybe my last point is, I guess that there is a call to action for all of us, but there is clearly a call to action for healthcare systems to get smarter and I will say faster in adapting services and regulatory frameworks for the innovation that is coming. Yesterday we were discussing about cell and gene therapies, many of them with curative intent in very difficult diseases like oncohematological diseases, and clearly this will represent an enormous opportunity, but also will require systems to completely change the way they are structured, including the regulatory frameworks. Importance of digital health and the importance of investing in data. We are convinced that this is the way to go in order to take fact-based decisions to improve healthcare. And finally, the importance of patient participation. Whilst data and finding efficiencies is going to be critical, but more and more we are ones that strongly believe that at the end of the day, in the coming years, we will be seeing increasing treatment individualization. So thanks for the opportunity to participate, and we are very much for partnering and continue discussing ways of further collaborating. Thank you.
Thank you indeed. So the key recipe here, well, talking about the future, is innovation and look into the future. And like it was said before, well, no money would be enough, would ever be enough. It is a proper balancing, fine-tuning that matters. I would like to give the floor to Novartis, Natalia Kolarova. Natalia, like the previous speaker, you represent a major pharmaceutical manufacturer, a company, and you are certainly keen on innovation. So what is your vision? Give us your outlook for balancing healthcare budget in the future. Hello, dear colleagues. Thank you very much. I represent the Novartis group of companies at this most crucial discussion, and I believe that ongoing dialogue is paramount for the success of our efforts. I really liked your definition of strategic audit, because what we are imagining now needs to be digitalized. Well, we need to have very precise vision of what we're going to achieve, and there should be a junction between innovative solutions and current practices that need innovation. I believe that these venues we talked at, and opportunities to hear from decision makers, from budget holders, from our dialogue for the manufacturers of innovative solutions, and Novartis manufactures or offers a whole lot of innovative decisions for various conditions, mass ailments and cardiovascular diseases, and some rare diseases for which we devise breakthrough technologies and remedies. Very few companies in the world can offer breakthrough solutions. We can. It is so good to see that the Russian Federation is becoming a breeding turf for new technology. Well, so one thing I would venture to suggest is to continue our ongoing dialogue on the strategic audit of the future, so that all patients, so that all members of the Federation and all market agents have an opportunity of coming up with their proposals and be engaged in a dynamic dialogue. Because life's evolving, and innovation will be changing our landscape, and our children will have a lifespan of 104 years. Please keep that in mind. And we are creating the future ourselves. Thank you so much. Thank you. And now I'd like to pass on the floor to the next speaker. Although you do not come from the corporate sector, but I will have a hard time naming all your positions. Mr. Vector, the General Director of MITS are named after Almazov from St. Petersburg, Evgeny Vladimirovich. Here is a general question to you. I'd like to introduce you as an exemplary personality. Benchmarking may be the number of visits you pay to the Russian president. We do know that you come from a center that launched numerous pilot projects, something that you will then transplant onto the new turf. So what's your recipe for a perfect balance of the healthcare budget? Well, this is not exactly a question to me.
But being a person who is very much in cardiology over the last several years, I have a vision on what approaches we could implement in order to improve the situation in Russia, considering the available financing. I'm not going to be talking in the categories of more money or less money, because there is never enough money. We know that we are not in the top 10 in terms of healthcare financing. That is why we should look at the effectiveness of healthcare financing. What we all are striving for is good quality services. And it is important to improve the availability and the quality of healthcare services we offer today. One of the problems, I think, is planning. By planning, I mean, well, when you look at how healthcare is organized, first of all, we need to provide the balance of financing for preventive care programs, expensive equipment, financing programs. So, indeed, it is simpler to finance preventive care, and we're tasked with that by the Minister of Finance. It is better to provide preventive care than treat patients who have bad lifestyle and who are exposed to risk factors. So, of course, we need to focus on the preventive care, and then the second priority is high-risk area, drugs provision, and high-technology medical care. Now, regional planning and local planning. There we have issues related to internal organization. Talking about value-based medicine, well, there the financing is focused on the result, but right now we are financing the process. And me personally, for example, being a manager of a medical institution, I'm interested in having more patients, because patients bring money. That's why changing financing is a burning issue. Take any complicated case, any chronic disease. In fact, if we have a lot of patients, we will have more money if we are talking about acute coronary syndrome. All the difficult and severe nosologies should be coordinated by dedicated centers. Today we see that all the regions and all specialists are focusing on being able to perform almost any interventions, any operation that are within their scope. Now, innovations. Undoubtedly, the increase of life expectancy that we've seen lately, it almost doubled, it is related to innovations, and no innovations, no increase of life expectancy. There we talk about new gadgets, new devices that can bring down the death rate by 10 to 20% in absolute terms. And now, without wasting no more time, the most important question and issue that we have today, the innovation cycle is much faster and much quicker than the reform cycle. We can't catch up with that. We should do something about it. Now, leadership. We need skilled workers, skilled experts. If we have a proper skilled labor force that will be able to be fast enough to catch up with those changes, then we will be okay. We mostly implement reactive management approaches. We need to become more proactive. So we need different people, or maybe people will be the same, but we will retrain them. We will pass them through new professional training programs so that they acquire leadership skills. I think that our medical professionals should be able to do that in order to operate in this new system of coordinates, in order to improve the system and meet the expectations of our population, to provide them with the medical services they expect. Thank you. Well, in fact, all of your statements, they may be very good mottos. We have two more experts. Oksana Moch from Sanofi. The question is the same, actually. What is the success formula for you? Well, you know, today speakers and experts mentioned a lot of various approaches, and I think that many important things were highlighted today. But let me go back to the topic of our plenary session. We are supposed to talk about budget, right? You have several times said today that it is not always the case that countries with the biggest budget for healthcare are the most efficient ones in terms of providing healthcare services. They are not at the top of the rating. If we look at the countries that are in top 3 or top 5 of healthcare services quality, usually they have 3 or 4 things in common. First is the comprehensive approach to preventive care, diagnostics, and online monitoring of results. Number 2, provision of medicine to the whole population. Number 3, good balance between various types of therapies, and there we need to find a good balance between generics and original drugs. And then aging. Usually those countries that are in 80-plus club, they spend approximately 9% of their GDPs to healthcare. We have 4. I would like to talk about the balance between generics and innovations, and here I want to cite an example of not of the US or Europe. I want to cite China. In 2006, they saw that the access to innovative drugs is very low in their country. They saw that from 2006 to 2016, several thousand innovative drugs were invented, but they were not making it to China. So they brought down the price for generic drugs. They decreased the volumes of procurement for some drugs, and they opened their doors to innovation. The result of that work was that today, China is a very attractive center that brings in lots of innovations, and they invest huge amounts into healthcare. Coming back to Russia and to innovations, I can only repeat what I said 1 hour and a half ago. It is very important for us to implement the differentiated approach in terms of generics and innovation. We need to introduce the notion of an innovative drug into our legislative system in order to differentiate between the systems of assessment that we will apply to innovations. And of course, we need to revise our procurement system for innovative drugs. Coming back to what colleagues said, it is important to establish dialogue between innovative producers, the Ministry of Healthcare, regions. It is important for them to sit together and assess the situation and look at how we can attain the needed results together. How to make our budget item investments into the health of our patients and our people. Thank you. Thank you. Grigory Potapov from Farm Standard, a Russian business, and I'm very glad to have you here among experts. Grigory, over to you. What do you have to share with us in terms of this discussion? It's difficult to be the last, so I have 2 points to make, maybe drawing an intermediary conclusion. I agree to all the previous speakers to what heads of our regions said. Of course, no single measure will be effective. It is important to have dialogue, but without additional financing, without improving the principle of operation, without involvement of the private sector, we will not be able to move on, or the measures will not work without the proper dialogue being established. So it means that the most important thing is partnership. We are going to rely on that a lot with our colleagues. And the only thing I would like to add, coming back to what we discussed during the previous session, we're continuously talking about making decisions. Making decisions is a mathematical task. We can only do that, we can only perform this task with reliable data. So digitalization, without proper information about the patient from the stage of diagnostics till the end of therapy, we cannot assess the effectiveness of the system without that. Without this information, we will not be able to make quality decisions. So I support all the things that were said by my colleagues, and at this point about the digitalization that we're going into in our private sector. Colleagues, thank you very much. We have some time for final remarks if you want. Just a couple of things to add to what has been already said. The success in healthcare is pegged not only on all the aspects mentioned by colleagues. Of course, we need to train professionals, we need to provide medicines, we need the three-tier system. However, an important input into that result is made by the interagency cooperation, because that is why we need to work with the Ministry of Transport and in order to implement the programs of modernization in our regions cannot be solved without revising transportation. If we renovate a rural hospital or build a rural hospital, but there is no transportation, there is no bus going there on a fixed schedule, the problem will remain for the population. We also need to cooperate with the Ministry of Labor. Without solving the problem of people with limited abilities, we cannot solve the problem. So the interagency cooperation is key for regions. That is why we urge the regional administration to implement that approach to solving healthcare system issues. Someone else? Please. Of course, it is important to use our funds effectively in terms of the three-tier system and performing territorial planning in specific regions. It is important to look at the types of care that are most needed there. I'd like to support this point about the systematic approach. It's important to look and take into consideration all the aspects of work. There are those who are forming and making the programs and those who are implementing them. This structure that we're discussing today, I think one element is missing, the society. While building a universal system that will be covering the whole territory of the Russian Federation, it is important to take into consideration the society, I mean, our patients. We need to think, what can we give to our patients considering our standards and our resources? A couple more words. Indeed, the success is only possible if we manage to build the system together. The system of the development of healthcare. We should do it in such a way so that we hit all the targets and consider all the priorities. It looks like we've been saying general phrases, but have you noticed that we were mentioning different deadlines, for example? Natalia, representing the compulsory medical insurance fund, they were saying about switching to 3-year cycle. Dear colleagues, we should think about at least 5 years. It is impossible to tackle those serious tasks, and having that deficit in finance, it is impossible to achieve anything over 1 year or even over 3 years. Implementing project procedures, I'm sure we will succeed in doing that, and I wish us all the success. Maxim? 2 aspects to add. I would like to support the representative of the Ministry of Healthcare. First of all, interagency cooperation, especially transportation. Discussing these new schemes, very often people are not against going to the neighboring district, but when they have to pay for that, or when they have to pay money that is significant for them, because right now we have lost this comprehensive system of transportation between regions. So we need to come up with new tools. Sometimes when we see that we have to compensate the patient's transportation expenditures, well, sometimes it is not very feasible doing that. Then another trend we are observing is the centralization of healthcare. It is the trend that we are observing over the last 12 to 13 years. First, I was against it, but I see that right now it becomes more and more feasible, and the Ministry of Healthcare is now posing stricter and stricter conditions for regions, but nevertheless we cannot apply uniform solutions to everyone. We shouldn't forget about that. I want to thank the colleagues from the Ministry of Finance. Officially, our government is not in exercise right now, but I would like to thank the colleagues from the Ministry of Finance for the constructive dialogue. It has helped us to move forward. Thank you very much. On my side, what I can say, well, lots of things were voiced and described, and I would like to thank Arad Farahov. He was supposed to be a moderator of this panel. He was getting ready for this panel, but I think that you all know that today that there is a very important event happening in the State Duma, and there is a discussion with the president. That is why Mr. Farahov is absent here and he is there. I would like to say a few words about the laws. I would like to thank the Ministry of Healthcare for this legacy in terms of the legislation, because our laws are guaranteeing the efficiency of our system of healthcare. The laws are important. Experts said that a lot needs to be done. Without proper tools, be that innovation or digitalization, all those new veins that are going to run and cover our system of healthcare, they first have to be described. They have to explain the rules of the games very well. That is why legislative aspects are very important. Now, drawing a line under our discussion, thank you, Andrei, for mentioning another aspect. Indeed, you can bring a horse to the river, but we cannot make the horse to drink. So the patient has to want to do something. So people have to hear and understand that the change is happening, and they need to understand their role in improving their health. Value-based medicine puts the patient into the center of the system. We have heard various recipes today. Indeed, they help us to shape the future. But what is an additional value of our today's discussion? From here, from this height, we are addressing the people, and we hope that they will hear us. We hope that they will take their role responsibly. They will understand what they can do themselves. They will use the opportunities they are given. But I'm sure that they will not let us down, and they will cope with all the challenges. Thank you very much.